Everyone, and welcome to the Money Pigs live cast. This is a Dawngate Roundtable talk show where we talk about Dawngate and the things going on in the Dawngate world. I am Twerp78 along with Spinal Dash and the Blue Muzzy. Joining us once again this week because he had such a good time last week, at least that's my story, is WaystoneGasty, who is once again with us to talk balance. Welcome, Gasty. Thank you for joining us once again.
Of course.
With,
Thanks for having me.
Spinal Dash and the Blue Muzzy. Yeah, man. So we are excited. There is a patch on the horizon. Unfortunately, it is not coming out tonight. We had a big reveal today, and then we have a lot of stuff to get to. But just want to start off with a disclaimer: there is no patch tonight, but we do have balance changes we are going to talk about. But first and foremost, let us go to today's Chronicles. Muzzy, do you want to lead us in a Chronicles discussion?
Yes, I'll post it. Sure. I hope Laments doesn't hate me. But so basically, Michaela puts on her face that she has been trained, to have basically this face of business, so to speak, and she does. She actually commits to a deal with her own father about basically her future, saying, I'll let you guys read it. You guys should definitely take a look at it. But I love that she, Michaela to me she's very stoic and she doesn't seem all that interesting, but she's, this kind of proves that it's kind of all just a facade for her, and she has to do this because that's what's expected of her. And she walks in and she's an adult, and she walks out and she goes back to being, maybe I wouldn't say a child at all, but like she's just a normal person who has feelings and who is not stoic anymore. And I really loved it. I thought it showed a lot of character.
I agree with you there, Muzzy. That was probably my favorite thing about today's Chronicle chapter was that last panel. I think it's the last panel or the second to last panel when Michaela's like out of the room and she shows that moment of vulnerability that you're talking about where she just kind of like, yes, like you see that like relief on her face and stuff. And I thought that I cared more about Michaela in that panel than I ever have up until this point, and I thought that was really a nice show of depth to the character. What were your thoughts, Spinal?
No, I'm taking acting notes, actually. This is how I make characters that are vulnerable. Everything you guys said is on point, though. Absolutely.
Cool. The other thing that's going on in the lore world is we're getting a new chapter in the Living Lore. I don't really know what to call it. Is it a new chapter in Living Lore?
Okay.
I think it's just a new Living Lore. Yeah, I guess you're right. I thought I had a word, but I don't.
I don't know, Gasty, is there a word we're missing here, or like what are you guys calling it?
For the
Living Lore,
the
like the
story
choice,
arc or for the voting arc?
the voting arc.
choice?
The choice in the client.
Just like major decision point.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's the next major decision point in the Chronicles, and it has to do with Michaela. She's either going to go and help Varian bury his dead friends, or go like investigate Petrus's experiments, which we all know probably means Vex.
Yes.
So that's going to be the next big lore point of contention. It doesn't seem as dire as the previous choice, but it kind of gives us, because and they did say when it came to the Living Lore, some are going to be more important than others. So this one seems kind of like a lesser one. It doesn't seem like a life or death kind of decision. It might be for Vex, but it doesn't seem quite as pressing.
Say that.
But yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's all a ruse, Gasty. Are we onto something? There's gonna be like a secret Easter egg we're not getting? Are we all missing the mark here?
I can't say,
Okay.
but there definitely are some Easter eggs / teases in the lore to come. So keep an eye out for delightful little drops.
Interesting. Just I think I'm gonna go with saving Vex. I don't know about what do you guys think. I'm just gonna lay my cards on the table.
Yeah, I'm on Vex. I think
I'm on Team Vex.
Yeah.
Animal cruelty, man. Come on, we can't.
I applaud you guys for having big hearts, but I'm gonna stay neutral until I get some more information.
Varian's a grown man, and he's he's just lost a lot of
He's still Han
friends.
Solo, and we want to have love.
Yeah, but I think that'll happen regardless. I don't think that he won't be noticed by Michaela. If
We
you know what I'm
haven't got a
saying.
booty touching scene yet, and that sounds imminent if we go to Varian's direction. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I mean, either way, I can see in this one.
It's
This
lore.
was a tough one. In this one, I could see it either way being really heartfelt in either direction. Just showing passion and standing up to Petrus, what is what it sounds like with her courageous heart, or showing compassion and being a friend to Varian when he really needs one. Either way, it could be good either way. But I want to see how people interact with Vex. Vex is a creature who's been given almost sentience in a way through the spirit. Maybe he had a low level and maybe he's been brought up a little bit more. He just seems really interesting. So that's my point.
It's either way, it's pretty cool, but I think this one it's not going to last quite as long as the previous vote did.
No,
So
I think that's a good choice. It's a choice is in the right direction.
yeah,
They're keeping it relevant by shortening the time span which you have to vote. They're giving us a little bit of primer beforehand, so like people can campaign like, oh, we have time where we know we have a decision. Now, you know, if the streamers or other people want to say, let's vote this way, and then other people say, no, let's vote that way, and then everybody gets put in their ballots. It's a little bit more presidential almost.
yeah, I kind of like this format. I like knowing what the choices are going to be instead of just being like, "Hi, we're live. Here are your choices." Because then it's
Mhm.
like, yeah, it does kind of like put you in a weirder position. This does kind of give you. I mean, even though it's something like
More hype,
as simple as a lore vote, which you can change at any point, you know, it's kind of nice. You get a little bit more hype this way because you're like, I got a couple days to think about this. Then when it goes live, it's like I know where I'm going. I feel good about this choice. This is the one I want to go with. So I do approve of this format, and I hope they continue giving us the lore choices before they actually go live in the game. So,
It also is nice because it allows the amount of contribution you can make in like a single night of playing is a lot higher, which I appreciate. Like in the previous 2-week session, you'd go ham like one day, and it would make a difference. But in a 3-day window, it definitely is going to make a much larger difference if you do that, which is cool.
yeah. So, exciting things coming with Living Lore. We're all excited to see where it ends up. But now that we've got all the fun storyline stuff out of the way, we can get to the meat of it. Today we had the big Basco reveal, and I must say I was smitten at first sight. I don't know about you guys, but everything about Basco just it made me squee internally. So, what were your just initial revealed impressions, guys? What'd you guys think? Just
Yeah.
look and visually, all that stuff.
Hands down, I think this might be the first time that I've seen the release skin be better than the original skin. That's the first thing that I.
Oh, you're such an art snob.
I'm so in love with.
You're such an
Shipbreaker.
art snob.
I cannot. I mean, I like the original, but that Shipbreaker just makes him seem so much more badass. And I will say, I'm Gasty. I know this is your baby, and I know that the symmetrical swords thing like needed to be done. But those original axes that he had, where they encased his hand, those just looked so badass. And I wish the skin we could get a skin with those original swords. That is my.
I mean,
my wish.
that could be a possibility, certainly.
Yeah, because those things that was so different. I mean, this is cool too. It's like a Y. It's very, very interesting. But those ones look just so cool.
I was
Anyway.
really surprised about and I mean this was a really cool aspect. Gasty was like the whole Cervantes motif from Soul Blade, Soul Calibur. Like I think that's really cool. I definitely saw, once Dibs and Pluto were talking about it, like the double cleave move he has, or I guess it's the first cast of his E, is that like double cleave dash, and even in his auto attack animations has that too. And I thought he did look really cool that way, and the way he was like spinning around and stuff. I'm like, yeah, he is kind of like a fighting game character. And I think there is it's a comparison I've seen before, but every time someone brings it up, I notice it again. But like fighting games and MOBAs do kind of share a lot of similar principles. So I mean, as far from a design standpoint, is that something, Gasty, like you want more of, or is this kind of like a one and done kind of thing where it's like kind of like a fighting game type character, or you just want to you see how the reception is from here and go from there, or is this like a philosophy you guys want to go with?
I think that it is really about finding a particular type of feel you want the character to really embody, and that can come from a variety of different sources. So in this instance, it really came from when I was playing Soul Calibur, and I was like, this particular, a couple particular combos feel really, really satisfying. In fact, I can throw it into chat here. Here we go. I just watched this YouTube video on repeat for like 4 hours. Where is my chat? Come here, chat. And I was just like, what? Because you need like you need the feel for Shaper, right? It needs to feel like you need certain combos, and it needs to really you need to be able to each individual little chunk needs to be really satisfying, and in addition to that, it also needs to be able to be really distinct from the other characters in the game. And this is a challenge across a variety of different archetypes. Like Dibs could speak to this better, but I know that with like mages particularly, like mages often have a very combo based, like Amaranth's EQ combo is a great example, right? Or like Zalgus's QE combo. Like there's a lot of just kind of combos you do, and that feels good because whenever the player can use different abilities together, it makes the player feel clever, and if you can do that, it's always good. But making those different combos feel really distinct from one another is challenging. So that's really the trick, right? And wherever we can get inspiration, where we're like, we all go see movies on Fridays. Like if a new movie comes out, like the entire Waystone office or a large amount of the Waystone office will go see the movie. And we often come out of a movie being like, how can we deliver that in a Shaper, right? Like Edge of Tomorrow, right? It's like, how can we have this like, Mara style exosuit, right? Can we deliver that feeling of being in this exosuit? And the more you can make that come away in a kit, the better. So Basco was in that form where it was like we want a combo type character, but we really need him to feel very distinct from our other characters. And one of the things that we were looking at, right, was like a fighting game style.
Guys, don't
option.
fuck around. If there's really a spider on my wall, you're gonna get 20 minutes of twerp looking for this fucking thing.
I actually moved the spider outside of my room just before it started, so it's a spider conspiracy.
You guys better not be fucking around. I don't mess with no spiders. I saw arachnophobia once when I was a kid, and it terrified me.
Oh gosh.
Twerp. Hannah was bit like 5 times by a
No,
spider.
no, I don't want to hear that, Muzzy. I don't need that in my life now.
She's got red dots all over her belly
Dude,
right now.
where was it, you bastards? All right,
Well,
continue what you do. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but yeah.
Trail.
No spiders, man.
No, I understand. The spider, spiders are number one priority. That's you gotta be real with it. But yeah, so that's basically it, right? It's all about finding something finding a particular ability combo that makes the player feel clever, and also making that combo just really feel different. And you can do that in a variety of ways. You can really leverage the art and animations. You can leverage the cadence at which you use the abilities. Like if you intentionally are trying to like encourage delays or something. But that's very challenging, right? One of the most challenging parts about Shaper design is really like in a cast of 150 characters or something, right? You really need to be able to make each individual one feel very distinct. And that was like the challenge I had with like Kensu as well, right? We wanted Kensu to feel very, very distinct from other characters. With Kensu, we looked at it from a more mechanical approach. We were like, okay, well, is there something we can do mechanically to make it feel very different? Where Bosco is much more of a kind of fictional feel kind of approach to it. It's like, can we make this character? Can we really deliver on bruising as a concept in the Kratos / fighting game style?
The Kratos influences are definitely there, and I think it's really cool, especially his ultimate, like the throwing of the chains out, then going to your target and having what is it? It's not an execute; it's just a flat amount of damage, right? Or
It
no?
is an execute. The ultimate
It is an
does have to
execute.
be
Yeah.
scale.
Yep.
So timing that and then getting like resets on it, like just Basco is just so cool looking.
I mean,
But yeah, I guess to answer your question succinctly, yes, we look for outside sources a lot. That happens a lot. Basically, we're like, be it a movie, be it a book, right? Like I think this was mentioned earlier, but Michaela, telekinetic coin stuff was inspired from Mistborn. I don't know if you guys have read that book, but uses coins as projectiles. So whenever we experience a piece of media which is like that's awesome. That just is super cool, right? The awesome thing about a MOBA is that it's a media space where we can bring that to life. We can bring the things that are really cool about other elements, and we can bring them together in one play space.
Yeah, that's awesome. Drawing inspiration from everywhere, like any good artist.
Gasty.
So-
If we're talking about Tabasco here, do you feel that it's harder to balance shapers that have a exceedingly high amount of mobility?
Not anymore.
Okay.
There's a variety of tools in a shaper kit that you have to balance it. The obvious ones are like cooldown and damage, right? And it's like you can increase the damage and you can increase the cooldown, and that's sort of a metric. It's almost like one of those sim games where you have a variety of bars, and as you move one up, the other one goes down or up or down. The thing is that there's a bunch of those bars that people don't realize exist that have a really profound impact on balance. One of them is total time it takes to execute their combo, as an example. This is actually
Right.
one of the reasons
Like
with
Viridian, right?
The Kendra Ultimate remake is a great example of this. We wanted one of the ways that we were able to allow her damage to still be high, but balanced, quote unquote, right, is make it so that it takes a full 2 or 3 seconds to do her full combo, right? By having a reactivation delay on her ultimate and having it be split up into 3 chunks instead of being one instantly used nuke, it allows the total base damage on that ability to be a lot higher. So you look at that ability, right, and it's like, oh, it has 650 or something. It changed this patch, so I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, right? Now it's 600. Spoiler. Total damage. And people are like, 600 total AoE base damage? That's crazy. That's so high, right? Compare that to insert other character like Amaranth or whatever. And the difference is that hers is delayed. It takes 3 seconds. So with mobility, and that's just one of these avenues, right? There's a variety of those ones that are a little bit less intuitive, but mobility is just one of them. So for example, one of the ways we're able to balance Basco's mobility is by using more of it as a gap closer, which is inherently the most powerful part of mobility. He is sacrificing damage. If you start with your ultimate, you're getting actually pretty poor damage on it, because presumably if you are using it to initiate into a fight or use it as a really long gap closer, then you are sacrificing the execute damage. That's why it's execute scaling, for example. By making it execute scaling, it allows for its mobility range to actually be further, because you have a trade-off there. You're like, well, it can be really long range, but it's going to be inherently doing less damage as a result. Same with his E. If you use the first component of his E as a gap closer, you're not doing any damage with it, and it's a give and take in that way.
Do you worry about because you mentioned last week that varying win rates and shapers, but on different elo ranges or whatever you want to call it, different skill levels. Do you think someone like Basco, who has what looks to be just off the cuff a higher skill cap, do you think it could be kind of like a Moya situation where Moya is more effective at the higher ratings than at the lower ones? Is that something that you're concerned with, or are you trying to get that balanced across the board, or you're just like, it's inherent in just the way the game is played, where you're just going to have these things?
Yeah, I think that's inherent with any character that has really low cooldowns, as oddly as that may sound. Like the lower cooldowns a character has, the more decisions you have on when to use an ability or not, and how to use an ability. And the more decisions you have across a fight, the more opportunities there are to make the wrong decision or right decision, which inherently makes the process, right, more prone to mistakes. So it's going to excel in high skill.
I see.
Right. So like Moya with her 2 second spammable Q, right? Same with characters like Ashabel. It doesn't even have to be skill shots, right? Like Ashabel obviously is the quintessential example of a high skill cap character, but and people think about that because it's often a skill shot. They talk about, oh, well, good people will land the skill shot or not. But it's actually, at least, from a statistical perspective, that same concept is mirrored with just cooldowns in general. Like Moya is a great example because of her really short cooldowns. So I think the fact that he has really short cooldowns, I think will lend him to be one of those characters that will probably see a skill gap between high and low on.
Interesting.
What do you?
So
Where's he
when
going to have?
actually-
Oh God, Muzzy.
I was gonna say when you're balancing a shaper, no problem. If you're balancing a shaper, or creating the initial numbers for a shaper, do you first go, well, this is the archetype, let's start out with the exact same numbers as somebody else, like as far as like rank 1 2 3 4 5 up to 18 or whatever, or up to 20 rather, and then from there then you go, or actually it'd be up to 5, but I guess certain things do scale per level. So do you start out with a similar shaper and then tweak from there, or do you kind of try to get it in the ballpark and tweak from there separate, like based on their kit and stuff like that?
They all start within a similar spectrum. So we look at the DPS output of a character as well as their max burst potential. Those are like two of the benchmarks we use. So we'll look at their cooldowns and we look at over 10-second period what's their like relative optimal DPS output, and then we look at, okay, they just use a QWER and maybe up to 1 or 2 autos as what we consider their burst potential, and we look at that as well. And based on the archetype, we will basically put them into various buckets of numbers based on that, and if they're on the high end or low end of that bucket is based on how much utility their kit has, or other miscellaneous factors. Is it a skill shot? Is it not a skill shot? Does it have CC?
Right.
That'll kind of move them.
Is it AoE? Yeah.
Exactly, right. So, but the bucket is based on the archetype. So we'll say at a base level, right, very very first tuning pass that goes into a shaper. If it's a burst mage, we will make sure that their DPS and burst numbers are in line with other mages, and then we start to tweak it from there based on playtest iterations and utility on the kit.
So at what point? I mean, because I know you're basically going through iterations of how the abilities work, and also adding in the numbers and stuff. At what point during the spectrum of shaper creation do you decide to lock down the ability and just tweak numbers? Or is it like, oh, well, we've tried every number, this is really not feeling right, let's change the actual ability, then you kind of go back to square one? Like, how often does that kind of thing happen?
It happens, when that happens is usually probably a month before the patch is usually when that occurs, but it is a pretty hard point. It is when the kits, the principal kit designer will basically perform a handoff between the kit and the live balance team. It sort of becomes the responsibility of the live balance team before it actually goes live, when that transitional point occurs. So the principal kit designer will basically say, okay, this kit is considered locked. Its abilities aren't going to be changing, at least not in any way that would dramatically impact the balance. From that point, we look at the balance from a much closer perspective. We sort of take balance outliers in stride before kit lock, because before kit lock we're not really worried about the balance. We're worried about the feel it invokes and what type of gameplay it creates.
Right.
So does this what's fun, right? Does this need to be longer? Does it need to be shorter? And when a character is before that kit lock, they often vastly OP or vastly underpowered, as we're trying to really nail the feel independent of balance. But once kit lock occurs, then we'll suddenly be like, okay, it's locked. Let's try to actually nail the balance. Which areas are non-movable, and that's determined from the kit designer. So the kit designer says, okay, the kit's not changing. With the existing tuning that it has right now in its imbalanced state, these are the ones that I think are important. I feel it is important for this ability to be really high damaging feeling, or for this ability to be really long cooldown.
So how did Basco fare in this process?
So his was, here's a good example, is the Q ability. So the Q ability went through a variety of revisions, and the goal was always for it to feel like you are weaving it in between abilities. So for example, in one of its early incarnations, it used to just be a reactivatable ability similar to the E, similar to what it does now, targeted sort of multi-dash plus damage, but it was reactivatable, and various reactivation stages did different effects. But it felt really, really spammy on a single target. You didn't really feel incentivized to weave it in between characters, or weave it in between abilities. And then it sort of became every ability that you used would reset its cooldown to try to force that cadence. So it went through a variety of revisions, but the the kind of overarching design goal across all of it was we want this to feel combo-y. We want to feel like it is being used in between abilities. And when the kit lock occurred, from a balance perspective, we wanted to make sure that was maintained. So, for example, that meant that the cooldown could not go any higher than basically 3 seconds, because otherwise it could no longer be weaved in between its other abilities. It was just too long. So from a balance perspective, we were like, okay, the cooldown cannot go above this. That's sort of locked from the kit, from the designer's goals. So with that kind of lock in mind, what other avenues can we move around to make it balanced? So we moved around the range of the dash, we moved around the scaling on the empowerment, those type of elements, but from a design standpoint, the cooldown was sort of not used as a balancing metric at that point.
All right, cool.
What do you? I mean, Basco just initially looks like he's pretty versatile. I mean, it looks like he can definitely jungle. He seems to be able to. I think you can play him gladiator, bruiser gladiator style. He's got enough ways to get out of trouble with his high mobility. I think you could even play him tactician in the same sense. You can get in, get your tact bonus. So actually, you could probably even get the 40 tact bonus if you're good at using his positioning abilities, because you can just kind of use your abilities just to get close enough to land the auto and then just hop away. So it really looks like, and I'm definitely going to play him Predator because, Pred life. So he looks very versatile, and that's, and that's something that excites me because I like to be able to play people in all sorts of different roles. Which roles have been having the most success in the internal tests right now, if you can tell us that?
Yeah, I mean, internally, he's definitely been seeing the most success as a hunter followed by gladiator. Mostly because he actually has really, really good scaling. Sort of part of the goal of trying to make him item, in order to try to make his build diverse, his base values on his shield, for example, are okay, but the power ratio on the shield is quite good, and that's sort of true on his damage as well. His damage is decent, but the power ratios are probably above average by a little bit, to try to encourage the ability to do something other than just the tanky builds. So as a result, we've seen Gladiator, anything that can basically get high Vim outputs, right? If a Predator is successful, they would also be great, but Gladiator and going pretty farm heavy in the jungle, we've both seen good success. We haven't seen him played very much as a tactician, so we don't really know. I think that he potentially, like you said, could do it, but people internally mostly ended up taking him between Gladiator and Hunter.
I mean, that's a relatively small sample size, so I think once it gets out to the masses,
very small sample size.
That'll be shown. It'll be put through the ringer, I guess. I mean, with his ability he's got high mobility, being in lane. Granted, high mobility and lockdown and stuff like that, and survivability seems like, okay, just throw him in the jungle, almost like an obvious choice. But with his ability to dash forward and hit an E, and then dash backwards, and he seems so safe in lane that he could proc the tactician, but he would be using his ability damage to get in to proc it and get back out, not necessarily actually harassing. So MOBA Champion says it seems like a trap, and I can kind of see that, but I'd love to see somebody make it work.
Yeah, I mean, and you could use your E like that in the way that you described.
Yeah, but I mean, with his built-in shield, you know what I mean? Like at level 4, I mean, and a lot of times when you're harassing with tactician, you're not doing it to kill them and force them out of lane. You're just trying to proc your Vim bonus.
Well, and zoning, obviously.
And zoning. But I mean, a lot of times when I'm playing Renzo and whoever I'm laning with is safe, I pop my shield on myself and walk up to somebody's face and punch him. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to get any meaningful harass off. I'm just trying to get money.
Right.
And I think if you want to do that with this guy, I think it could be okay. And then pick and choose your moment, obviously, when you want to go all in. But I don't see anything wrong with using your abilities just to proc tact bonus, at least, on your way to 6 until you want to set up a kill at 5. Then you start looking for more meaningful harass, but...
Well, given that his abilities are also AoE, I think it may be slightly dangerous to do to play tactician with a ranged gladiator, because you'd be really messing up their farm. So maybe running double melee lane or something like that. One glad, one that way you can hit it and it's okay. And he has a 25% slow, on his W. No, wait, sorry. He has 25% slow on his chain, sorry. And then his dash also has that 0.75 second stun. So, I mean, technically you could run double melee lane. It might get out poked. Interesting though. I can't wait to see how he's played. I'm really sad there's no patch tonight because I wanted to I wanted to try him out.
I was hoping that there was going to be a patch tonight so we could just
Yeah.
money picks would be over and it's like, oh, the patch is up, guys. Let's go. Everyone, let's go play Basco. But no, alas, that is not going to be the case tonight. But
We too were hoping for a patch.
Yeah.
But there were some performance issues that concerned us, so we wanted to make sure we smoothed those
Right.
out before we launched it.
no, you're right. You're right about that. What you call it? I had a thought and now I lost it.
It's over.
Do you
Well,
guys
to go
have-
on
yeah.
what you were saying, one of the things to point out that's important as a distinction between Renzo with his shield and Vasco's shield is that Vasco's shield is over time. So if and it's proportional to the number of targets you're hitting. So in lane with only 2 targets usually, you can't really shield yourself first before you go in. Once you go in and you hit your W, you have a very, very small amount of shield because it builds up over 4 seconds. So if you're trying to go in, proc tactician or do some poke and then get out, you're actually not going to be able to maintain very much shielding during that encounter,
Right.
which is a risk certainly.
It's pretty awesome.
What-
I love this skit. God, I can't wait to try it out.
Yeah, I mean, I was joking all day about how I left. I'm gonna break up with Cerulean for Basco. I gotta get my hands on it first, but just my initial reaction was just like, I'm sorry, Cerulean, but this is my new bro. So what are you gonna do? But
Yeah.
anyway, there are much more balance changes that are coming with this patch when it does get here. So I guess we should transition into the balance discussion. Spinal, do you want to
Sure.
lead us off?
Should I or should
Yeah,
Gasty?
why not? Well, you can bring it up, and then we can let Gasty talk about the ideas, behind, why the changes happen.
Well, I think the first thing we could talk
Aha,
about
cool.
is you guys don't know,
Freya.
but about
Freya.
it's the Freya changes are coupled with the Mara changes.
Okay.
Because they're both kind of working on the same thing. Gasty talked about how there is, after your certain abilities, there is an auto attack delay, right? Or it's not even after the abilities, sometimes it's during the abilities as well. But Freya, I complained to Gasty about Freya having a very long delay after her W to auto attack, and it was making it kind of difficult both to maintain the stacks of rage when she was jungling and you're going from one camp to the next, and it was also making it a little difficult for her to squeeze in an auto attack. Like, she would initiate and she would W, E, Alt, R, or Q, and then she spent like 2 seconds without doing a single auto attack. And I also complained about Mara, who when she Qs in, she gets a free auto attack. And so Gasty went and he looked at some of the coding, and it turns out Mara was coded a little bit interestingly. And so now Mara has a delay on her. After she lands her Q, she has a 0.2 second delay before she can auto attack. And Freya's auto attack delay has been reduced a little bit. Also, for Mara's got a little bit of nerf to her Bramble Crush late game, to her higher levels of Bramble Crush, to make her a little bit less oppressive in the lane. And those are
But
two.
I mean,
what do you mean?
At
what I mean?
higher levels. Well, at higher
I'm
levels.
sorry, at higher levels of her Bramble Crush.
Yes,
Not at higher
of her
levels
Bramble
of play.
Yes.
So like her
because
level
by
1 Bramble
then,
Crush is
by
the
then
same.
she's not using it in the lane.
Well, sometimes.
maybe. Yeah.
What do you want to say about that, Gasty?
Yeah, I mean, it was the auto attack delays are done less for balance reasons, although they have balance implications, and they're done more for visual kind of animation reasons. And there were some bugs. There was definitely some bugs with Mara in her favor that was sort of just fixed up. And like, for example, you could get hit by her Q and then dispel and blink away, and you would still get hit by the auto attack, half a second afterwards, even though you were really far away from her. Things like that. So yeah, your comment sort of made us do a extra close look for some auto attack related bugs, because the behavior you were describing shouldn't have been as egregious as it was. You were describing how Freya and Mara felt very different, and I was like, well, that from the tuning, right? That really shouldn't be. So it helped uncover some bugs, which was useful. And then Freya, we just tuned it down to be the minimum that was basically still required from the animation perspective, to try to give her some love, because she needs some love.
So one quick question about that. The auto attack delay, that scales with haste, does it not?
It scales with haste for basic attacks. It does not scale with haste for abilities, because basic attacks are flagged to actually scale the whole animation with haste, whereas abilities don't scale their animation time with haste. Basically, the cast time of abilities does not scale with haste other than basics. So only basics get modified. Only the delay on basics gets modified.
So is the auto attack delay for basic attacks going to change with haste as she gets more haste or blinding speed?
No, this should only affect
So
her
she
W
should always.
specifically.
I mean, yes, exactly. So if she has like 150 haste, is the delay after her W shorter, or is it the same?
It's the same, because it exists in order to allow her to finish animating her W itself, independent of her auto attacks, and the W animation doesn't get modified.
And then can you animation cancel the animation from the W?
You can, yes.
You can. Okay. I thought so. I knew there was something going on there. These are like we're threading the needle here, but it makes a big difference in how in your initiations, when you initiate with Freya, if you animation cancel her W's animation after you hit somebody with after you dash them.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because that is something where we're towing the line between gameplay, feel, and responsiveness and balance, and visual quality. So we didn't want to lock the character from making any action for the full time it would take to animate, because that would be ridiculous. It would feel really slow and unresponsive. So we allow you to animation cancel it for a variety of things, such as using new abilities. So you can like W and an R immediately, and like it'll cancel the animation. Moving, you can issue a move command, it'll immediately start moving, instantaneously break you out of the animation. But basic attacking, we actually prevent you from being able to trigger a basic attack as one of the things that cancels the animation. Because that's the only thing the game would do automatically. So under the most common circumstance, the basic attack would actually clip the animation and cause it to look, not as awesome as we would hope. So we apply that restriction to the basic, but we don't do it to anything else, so that you can still hopefully feel as responsive as possible.
That's a big deal. Thank you for clearing that up for me.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're gonna keep going down here, Gasty, can you talk to us a little bit about the Kindred changes?
That's what I was curious about. Gasty,
yeah.
What's up with your girl, man? I thought Kindred was okay. Why is she still getting nerfed?
She finally felt good at the end of my 100 after all the changes, and now I feel like I have to play another 100 just to get used to these changes here.
The Kindred changes come from, actually, it's very relevant to the conversation we were just having, where there are goals for how a character feels independent of balance. The new Ultimate came out, and it wasn't delivering, and Muzzy, you know this better than anyone, because we were actually talking about it in a chat back when she launched. There were some feel-related problems, independent of balance, right? It didn't feel like you used the Ultimate fast enough. It felt like you were out of range a lot of the times. So we were like, okay, because the Ultimate was so new, we were still in the, let's get this to feel correct. Independent of balance within reason. Obviously, we don't want to introduce any egregious imbalancers into the live environment, but we have a couple of percentages we can, not worry about. If she goes from 50 to 52, that's okay in a exploratory phase like she was in with her new Ultimate. So basically, she came out, her Ultimate, we liked it, but it had some jank, basically. It just didn't quite feel right. We made another balance change aimed at making it feel the way we wanted. Try to give it the correct range, give it the correct reactivation delay. We got it feeling to a pretty good spot.
Felt way better. Way better.
Felt way better. But those changes had a positive balance impact on her that was unwarranted. Basically, got it to feel correct, but it put her in too good of a spot. So now we're just reacting to that. Now we're toning her down to put her back in our intended balance spot in a way that leaves that ability in from a feel perspective, unchanged, right? It should still feel the same. You won't be able to notice viscerally a small damage reduction, but it will move her stats in line with where she should be. So that's sort of the give and take, right? We make changes from a field perspective, and then we react to that with balance changes afterwards. And this is the reaction to the field changes.
And
That's
I
awesome.
think that's an excellent explanation. I agree. I mean, I feel like she's always going to cause problems with that reset mechanic, right? But
It is challenging.
Basco.
Yeah, resets are always challenging. You sort of need to balance against them by how easy it is to get them. So Kendra, for example, has the easiest resets to get because all you have to do is have them die, and you brush by them, you brush them on the cheek for 1 point of damage, and they get murdered by somebody else, and you're like, all right, let's do this, right?
Yeah.
So she has by the nature of hers being the easiest to get. Her trade-off is she has extremely low base damages. If you look at her base damage, she has 4 damaging abilities, and if you look at the base damage of all 4 of her damaging abilities, with the exception of her Q before this change, now her Q actually has lower base damage than basically every other mage, but before this change, her Q was on par, and her W, E, and R were all lower. Now, all 4 of her abilities across the board just have significantly lower base damage than any other mage. So,
interesting.
that's the trade-off for her resets.
Well,
basically.
also all of her abilities are essentially AOE. So I mean, not the jump, but the jump is essentially like now my things have extra range. So her mobility that totally makes sense with the amount of mobility, especially reset mobility.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing there to note is you not only balance her not only just on her own numbers like win rates percentages, but you're also balancing her against other mages. You're saying her Q now has less damage than the other kids in the pool.
Which is interesting because I mean her archetype is assassin, even though she deals magic damage. So do you always balance against the archetype and whether it's physical or magic? Or auto attack or ability shaper?
No, the way that we look at it is basically archetypes aren't in their own perfectly isolated vacuum. There are things that carry over. So, for example, burst mages, because they're designed to 100% squishies, and assassins that are designed to 100% squishies, share damage benchmarks. The difference, and it's kind of like a Venn diagram. There's some overlap, and there's some not. So, for example, damage overlaps between burst mages and assassins. Crowd control does not. Burst mages will have like AoE CC pretty commonly, right? Like Amaranth ultimate. I guess Zalgus has a yeah, it's not his ultimate, but he has AoE CC. So like AoE hard CC is a characteristic that's pretty common on mages. It's fine. We're like, yeah, do you want to make it a burst mage and it has a AoE stun with 1 billion trillion damage? Yeah, sure, whatever, right? That's reasonable. It's a burst mage thing. But for an assassin, that'd be like, no way, right? That's completely unreasonable for an assassin. So
but
that's
you have Freya.
Yeah, but Freya is a unique snowflake. I can talk all day about Freya.
And actually, I'm on game 73 out of 100 with Freya, and I have some words that we have to have about Freya.
Freya is a challenge from a variety of design areas. But generally speaking, if you look at a Venn diagram between mages and assassins, you would see they overlap in damage, and the areas where they don't overlap is CC on the mage side and mobility on the assassin side. On the assassin side, you'll see extremely strong mobility moves, such as Kendra, obviously, Viridian's. Viridian has like 2,000 potential range of non-targeted wall jumping movement, right? It's like crazy. And Freya obviously has a double reactivatable super jump that gives her move speed, whereas Zalgus has nothing. Ashabel has nothing. Like Amaranth has a little thing. It's not great. It's okay, right? So it's a give and take. There's overlap between archetypes. And if you look at things like bruisers and tanks, right, it's like both of them have CC on their kit, but tanks usually have large radius AoE CC, whereas bruisers usually have smaller radius or single target CC. So there's overlap, but yeah, we generally do, burst mages and assassins will generally share damage benchmarks.
Interesting. Cool. All right, so on to more shapers here. Shaper changes that we have.
You want to talk Mara?
I was gonna say let's leave. Can we leave Mina to the last one because
there's books we can write
that's
about
what
Mina.
I'm saying. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's important to note quicksand getting fixed, a bug. It says fix the bug where enemies on the outer edge of quicksand were getting slowed by less than the intended amount. That's interesting. That'll be a nice little buff to Koggin.
You know,
Kel's,
yeah,
go
I
ahead.
played a little bit of Lane Coggin, and I was gonna say I didn't know if it was just me or the fact that I wasn't leveling my quicksand, but I definitely noticed that, like, I threw my quicksand and, like, that guy just walked through it and was not slowed. I didn't know if that was just, like, me or what was going on there, so I think I know that bug, and I'm glad that's getting fixed. And I think it might make Lane Coggin more viable. I think you can do it. I mean, it's hard to do against double range lane, but definitely a range and a melee. Like, if you go up against a Renzo, I think Coggin's really, really good against Renzo.
Well, what's interesting is I find Kaga to be the anti-gank lane shaper. If you're going to come in, you're going to get sandsed and
stunned.
and stunned and potentially dragged right back underneath your binding. And I feel like if he plays safe under the binding, he's an amazing lane person. But his home's in the jungle still.
This is the twerp prediction. I think we're going to start seeing more and more Lane Coggins. I might be doing it more and trying to influence this, but I think Lane
Good.
Coggin is a thing. More hooks, people. Hooks are love. Hooks are life. And if I'm not mistaken, this is Shaper 30, yes? Basco?
This is, yeah.
This
So,
is, yeah.
so
The
I
big
mean,
3-0.
in the early weeks of Money Pigs, we talked about the dream of 30 shapers and a hook, and it's happening.
We're about
so
to hit it.
I don't know. We're gonna have to start upping in the ante and asking for more things. So now it's like draft mode. So I don't know what else to pine for, but just to get to 30 and a hook is a pretty cool milestone. I just wanted to point that out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Faux show.
There's a lot of interesting little things. Gassy, let's talk a little bit about Viridian. All right. You gave him a couple of buffs. You increased the damage of his ult Deep Rising, so it does significantly more damage, 50 at level 1. That's a 25% increase. That's pretty significant.
Well, it's 50 at every level. It's massive. It feels like.
Right. Well, I don't know if massive is the word, but it's significant certainly. But I think he gets a little bit more movement speed on his W, which is interesting because I felt at like Moya level of uncatchable already playing him with Surge. So that's interesting. But knife toss. This to me is the most interesting change. The time it takes to generate one knife has been reduced to 6 seconds, down from 8.
That's pretty big.
Can you talk about that a little bit, Gassy? Like, what are your intentions with that? Are you trying to buff him in the jungle? Or are you saying we should be maxing Q first? I'm maxing W and I'm doing it wrong? Like, what's going on here?
Sure. So Viridian is an interesting balance case where how I was just talking about examples where certain tuning benchmarks can be locked from like a feel perspective. Like we couldn't increase the cooldown of Basco's Q because of a certain feel. Certain elements of tuning can also be locked from a balance perspective. So Viridian is a good example of that. His hypothetical damage output is extremely high. Ashabel is actually a great example of this as well. For both Ashabel and Viridian, we cannot increase their damage output, basically, like significantly, right? Like their core, like we have an opportunity to do it with their ultimate because their ultimate is not commonly used with their average damage rotation. Right, in most skirmishes, they're not like ulting every fight. So with characters, those characters are almost hypothetically like damage capped, right? It's just like it's theoretically so massive, it's really hard just to like give them more damage. So it really comes down to those characters have so much damage, right? Why aren't they the best? Why aren't they the king and queen of the Dungate, right? And it has to do with how often they're able to reliably do that damage. So really with characters like that, we look at how can we increase their usability, right? Their chance of actually successfully doing those damage combos. So that's where you'll see the W change, for example, on Viridian came from. It was like, let's try to make him so he can stick to his targets a little bit quicker, to more reliably get more of those empowered autos off, to be within his E range a little bit more often. Maybe it allows him to escape, but the intention here is really to try to make him stick a little bit more when he needs to be.
I like that change a lot.
Yeah,
this seems scary to me because I've gotten rocked by tons of Viridians diving, hitting, and then diving out of the tower. So I'm pretty scared by this actually.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like for characters that have their damage output basically at the cap, you'll always have experiences where we just get wrecked by them, right? Because the problem isn't their damage. Like Viridian's damage is awesome, right? So you're always gonna the stars are gonna align and somebody's gonna do a full combo on you, and you're just gonna be like, whoa, that character's insane. I just got wrecked. But if that only happens 20% of the time he engages, right, the character can still fall below our spectrum of balance. The knife toss change is actually to increase his laning. Statistically, he's played a lot in the lane. In fact, he's played the most. Gladiator is his most played role.
Wow.
But it is not the best role, performing role that he had. So clearly, players wanted to play in Gladiator. He was appealing to Gladiator players. So we're like, okay, if that's what people really want to play him as, what can we do targeted to really try to increase that viability? And this looking at the data, one of the things that was interesting about him was that his ability to kill minions to CS as a melee was rough. So by allowing him to throw ranged, and being the only ranged ability he really had, right, was his Q. So by allowing him to Q more often, one of the hopes is that he'll be able to last hit with it a little bit more effectively. It's hard because the base damage on the Q is really low, but that was really the only tool he had. And it's also one of the things which is just it's the most active part of his kit, right? It's one of the things you're doing in small skirmishes. So whenever we make balance changes, if we can, make players take more actions, then generally they have more fun. So the cooldown on this was a good way to do that without increasing his burst damage potential.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Did you do this to, from 8 to 6, that seems like a big jump. Was this to try to match up with Tactician better, the Tactician bonus better?
That was part of it, but a lot of it came from just the cadence that minions die in lane. This is a low enough cooldown now from a gladiator's perspective that he should have a much easier time being able to nail the last hits before they get automatically killed by other minions. If you just let a wave just clash in a vacuum, you'll see that the minions die at a cadence which was just a little bit before the 8-second mark. You could get like 1 in every 2. It's going to be now. This gives them a little bit. It's a little bit closer to the standard minion clash right now.
Oh, and I mean, I feel like what do you think? What do you think about the ramifications for jungle? I think a lot of the complaints with this jungle has been that it's a little bit slow clearing. Do you anticipate this as being a buff to that purposefully?
Yeah, for sure. Like basically, we were looking at him, and he's played still pretty evenly amongst all 4 roles. The most in Gladiator, second most in Hunter, but he has significant, he's played significantly in the other roles as well. And while the change was targeted at primarily around his Gladiator performance, we definitely were cognizant of the Hunter increase as well, and that was warranted. He needed a boost there as well, and like you said, one of the complaints was that it felt like his clear speed was a little slow. So this was killing 2 birds with one stone, so to speak. We were able to make a single balance change that didn't increase his burst damage, but helped out both
him
of
across the board. Yeah. That's all I have for Viridian. You guys have any things you want to say?
I'm glad he's getting these buffs. Because I think Viridian felt underpowered for a lot of people, and they were like, "Oh, why am I going to play this guy? I could just play Kindra if I'm going to play an assassin." But now, like, just that 2% at the beginning, the 10% bonus move speed on W up from 8, like that just at level 1, I think that's going to help him a lot. I even felt like I didn't even notice the 8%. I feel like I'll notice the 10% a little bit better. And the ult, being more in damage, it just fits that. I know it's mainly used for its displacement and its ability to make someone, take someone out of the fight or bring them back to a position where you can manage them. But he still is an assassin, so it should be damaging. I mean, you are getting impaled by a whale, for God's sake. It should, you always talk about visual and how
stunning.
things should feel. You know what I mean? Well, if I hit something with a whale, I want it to, hurt. So yep. I like that synergy there. One thing I noticed all around it when it comes to displacement, just because I'm looking at it right now, is you can dispel the displacement aspect of a lot of these abilities now. Petrus ultimate, Viridian's ultimate. You could always do it with Kaghan's ultimate, which I thought was a really nice playmaking spell, and I'm glad you're adding more of this to it, because I think if you are really quick with your dispel, you should be able to get out of these rough spots, and it's always fun to watch someone dispel a Kaghan ultimate or something like that. So I'll be looking to pick up dispel more often instead of blitz, and try and make plays against Petruses and things like that.
Yep. Yeah, his ultimate was just like I said, right? How there's basically it's like a simulation game with all those bars filling of various things, damage, utility, etc. The reason his ultimate's damage was a little bit low, it basically had utility damage numbers, was because it had really high displacement. It basically had hard CC, right? Displacement is a hard CC, so it had hard CC on it, and then it also had really strong mobility. Like you can just use it just to, like, GTFO out of a fight, right? Like things going bad, see ya. So that caused his damage numbers to be a little bit lower, but it ended up not being warranted. But that's sort of why he launched in that state. But turns out it's not necessary, so he got his numbers back up to the lower end of the mage spectrum there.
Okay, moving forward, I'm going to skip over the rest of the balance changes directly to Shapers and move over to some of the items that I think are really big. I think, honestly, the biggest buff Viridian is going to get, in my opinion, is the changes to Rage. For you guys who don't know, Muzzy just linked the patch notes, but Rage is getting an increase in power. It's going from 30 to 45 power. It's losing the 10 defense penetration, which is interesting.
The flat penetration.
It's using the 10 flat penetration, which is interesting because is it going to be the only item that actually loses stats as it upgrades? I don't know. But very few items actually do that. And then the Furious Assault passive, which penetrates bonus armor, is going from 60% penetration to 50%. And then the price is going up from 2,500 to 3,000. Do you want to talk about that? Because that's a lot. Rage is an item that's bought on almost every AD carry, especially, I should say range carry, actually. Rage is an item that's bought often, especially on range carries. And this is big changes. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Cassie?
Yeah. So the goal here was basically Rage was too mandatory. What we were seeing was and this is part of the reason why it lost its flat defense penetration, and you'll see the destruction gain some defense penetration. So and this is also one of the basis behind the Insight change. Insight is now actually pretty good penetration item with the pre-mitigation calculation on the true damage. We wanted more diversity in anti-tank options. We sort of felt like if you are a damage character, with the amount of mitigation in the game right now, you have to always buy Rage. It's sort of, it's often, when you're talking about a full 6-item build, it's considered often very mandatory on carries.
Certainly.
And that is a little bit sad, right? One of the goals behind the itemization system is to provide choice to the players, and the Rage goal, the design goal for Rage, is that you want to buy this when somebody is really, really heavily stacking defenses. If they have 3 primary defensive items and that it's going to be penetrating 100 defenses, then it should be definitely the clear choice. But if they have like 1 defensive item, right, that's like early in the game, and they have like an Adamance and a Defiance or something, right? It's like a health item and an armor item. You shouldn't feel like you absolutely must get a Rage. And we were finding that basically it mathematically was just outperforming flat penetration really early on. You needed very, very small amounts of armor or magic resistance for it to just always be the best penetration choice. So by increasing the flat penetration on Judgment, by increasing the flat penetration on Destruction, by making it so that Insight deals its true damage before mitigation, we're providing some other choices around both early, mid, and late game penetration options. And that bringing Rage more into line should allow for, amongst those 4 items, each one hits its like optimal beat at a different amount of defenses. So depending on where people are at, where your opponents are at, you should be able to have a more interesting itemization landscape there. Again, this is part of an in-progress item balance migration, so there may still be some balance outliers. That's why we're doing it in chunks, but that's the goal, right? The goal is for there to be a little bit more diversity in the itemization against with defense penetration for damage dealers.
Now, real quick before we go even back to any of the shapers or anything, I mean, we've talked about this before. This migration from for advanced items to be around 1,500 and legendary to be 3,000, and I can see this happening, everywhere, and that seems to be the path that we're taking. But I'm just wondering because, like when you're setting the price for 3,000 and you're saying, okay, we're going to change this from 15 to 25 power, or in another one, you're going to go from 15 to only 20 power, and we're upping it to 3,000. When you guys are making these changes, I know that you have a price per point of power in Vim. So are you guys actually mathing that out every single time and trying to make it exact, or are you should it be 16 power and not 15 power, but you just want to round it off at the fives or something like that?
No, we math it out to be exact. There, in fact, if you look in the patch history, you'll see in the very early gates Dawngate there were some items that basically had odd numbers, right? It was like 26 power here, 11 power there. As we rebalanced them, we have done our best to try to make it land on even numbers. We've accomplished that, but it's not cheated. It's all done through a formula.
Okay.
In fact, that's why we've been able to change the price. Basically, stats were standardized and the price was variable before. It's like a formula, right? It's like x plus y equals something. We just reversed that. We just solved for a different variable now. We're basically saying, okay, well, instead of the price being variable and the stats being consistent, we're like, we know it wants 25 power. What does that cost? Okay, it turns out it costs 1090 or whatever, like consumption. Instead, we just say we want it to be this price. Price is now the constant instead of the stats. We don't care how much power it has. Doesn't need to be 25. Can be any number. We want the price to be 1,500. Plug it into the exact same formula. Solve for a different number. Out comes the amount of power it should have. Now, the way that we are able to get it to round to nice numbers is then basically there is what's called the premium. Well, there's two things. There's a premium and there is a cost associated with the passive. So the passive cost is effectively just tuned from telemetry data. We basically say, we look at the performance of an item and we say, okay, is this item underperforming or overperforming? We use that to influence our decisions on how much the passive should be worth. But it's sort of an imprecise science, unlike stats, which is extremely precise.
So you start with stats, get that price exact, and then try to tune the passive to fill out the remainder.
Right. So basically, and that allows us to use the passive as because passives are way less discrete. We can tune them more in a more granular spectrum. It allows us to sort of hone in the remainder of the price point, for example, with the passive. And you'll see that with, for example, the change to betrayal.
Yeah, that was a big one.
With like one of the ways we hit it was the passive.
It was too efficient. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's one of it. And the other thing is the premium. And premium is how much of that item's stats are free. Because I think we talked about this last week actually, but there's a goal where basic items are more efficient than advanced, which are more efficient than legendary. The way we do that is we basically give you a certain amount of the stats for free, and that premium is determined by which stats are on it in addition to the tier. So for example, an item that has just power will have a very low premium, like supremacy, because the chance that you are engaging in an activity which uses all of that stat optimally is very, very high. The chance that you're using 90 power, pretty much every circumstance is going to be using that power. It's easy to take advantage of, so it has a low amount of free stats. Compare it to an item like Hope or Justice. Hope's a good example, where it's armor and magic resistance. The chance that you're simultaneously taking physical damage and magical damage is not necessarily 100%. Maybe you're dueling just the physical shaper and the magic resistance component of it is completely useless. Unlike Supremacy, where that power is always useful. So the fact that there is a less likely statistical chance you are actually even using at all the stats given to you from that item means each individual category of stat gets to be a little bit higher. So where, for example, you'd see an item like Order give you 100 armor, right? An equally priced item would not give you 50 armor and 50 magic resistance. It would probably
Right.
give you something like 60 armor and 60 magic resistance, more total
Right.
stats,
Right.
because the premium would be, you'd have a little bit of a premium because it's less likely you're using both stats simultaneously. So that's another way. We can also add more stats to increase or to remove stats, or increase certain stats to increase or decrease the premium, and that's another axis we have to tune it.
Right. There's a pretty big change to insight. I think insight might be. It seems like it might be the biggest buff in this list, and I mean,
They're
correct me if
bringing
I'm
it
wrong.
back.
It seems like insight's now going to be an item again. The true damage applied by this item's unique passive puncture will now calculate its damage before your target's mitigation is applied instead of afterwards. So that means that hope and stuff like that, when it procs even, it doesn't make this item any less useful.
Right. I mean, it was always
it's at 20% right now.
10%.
10%. Sorry, it was up from something else before. Yeah.
It's up from 5, yeah?
I mean, the fact that
Up from
it's true
5.
damage, it was always designed to kind of punch through beefy tank lines, but the fact that their mitigation still affected it made it less desirable to actually do that, even though it was still
Right.
effective sometimes. So this was paired with the change to Rage and Judgment and Destruction as sort of a rebalancing of penetration in general.
Hey, Gasty. I hear a lot of complaints often about people will compare a defensive item to an offensive item, or let's say in general, defensive items in general are too strong, which leads to bruisers being too strong. And I know that there's some theory that goes on between like why defensive items should be stronger in general than offensive items. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's sort of because by there's a variety of different things that go into this, but at a high level, it's because in a vacuum, offense wins. If they're equivalent, because you're always doing both, right? You're always like if you're a tank, you're doing some amount of damage, as an example. It may be smaller, but you're doing some amount. So by having offense is always sort of guaranteed, whereas mitigation is sort of not. Like if you are Amaranth, for example, your mitigation is. I'm trying to find a good way to describe this. If you take Reyna versus Amaranth, right? A really beefy Reyna versus an Amaranth, it's way easier to completely negate her damage than it is for. I guess that's the best way to put it. There's basically a threshold of usefulness for damage. Once damage falls below a certain threshold, and you're no longer on track to kill them before they will kill you, it effectively goes to 0. Which is why you can see people who are really tanky often are considered better, right? This is where the concept of like tankiness becoming the best way to play bruisers and stuff comes from, is because as long as you can just be on out DPS them, you will. That's all you need. And when you start, people with high damage are the winners of that trade by default, right? By default, the tanks lose to Amaranth. In a 1v1 with no items, right, Amaranth will beat the tank. Damage dealers are tuned to have the advantage initially. The reason why defense can scale that is to create a environment where that initial state has counterplay. Basically, you're saying, I'm initially getting blown up by this character. I can now buy items and prevent myself from getting blown up. Of course, we want there to be counterplay there, right? Where it's like, okay, now Amaranth can buy defense items and try to help prevent that. But ultimately, there needs to be a winner between that trade, because at start it is power, and what determines how we balance around who gets to win in the leapfrogging of items and counter items is a rock paper scissor environment where we want certain archetypes to be able to beat other certain archetypes. So assassins, for example, at their end game itemization state should be able to pretty much 100%, if not almost 100% / force out of the fight squishies like carries and mages. So that is a state which we need to make sure is always true. Then, to continue that rock paper scissors environment, if mages count and if assassins counter mages, then mages counter carries and carries counter tanks, right? And it goes along in that line. Basically, in that rock paper scissors of MOBA balance, that is where basically the argument of why do at a certain stage of the game defense items reign supreme comes from. Because in order for tanks and bruisers to be able to withstand mages, they need to be able to survive to that point, right? Like in a duel, a late game AD carry will beat a tank. In a duel, a late game AD carry should not be a bruiser. Bruisers are sort of designed to beat carries in that way, right?
Right.
So it all comes from sort of that late game rock paper scissors mentality. Now, this is obviously subject to change. It's one of the things about beta, right? If it's deemed that bruisers should not beat carries late game, then we can reduce their defensive itemization, right, and make that true. But every character should have, something it beats on that rock paper scissors scale, so that you're incentivized to bring certain archetypes into a team composition. Especially when draft mode hits, I think this will become more prevalent. But every character and every archetype should have a hypothetical strength and weakness where you'd want to take it or not want to take it, depending on the comp of your opponents. And itemization is really the primary tool we have to make that rock paper scissors machine function.
Okay. Cool.
I like
That's
it.
pretty interesting. Yeah. Are there any other items that you guys want to go over? Any big
There's a
ones?
lot of stuff in here. I don't want to hash out every single thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of pretty amazing changes. Honestly,
I would like to touch on Bastion, and I would like to talk on spells.
Yeah, the spells, absolutely.
Because I do like seeing.
Yeah.
It seems you're trying to make a play for Bastion and Deflect to come back into play, which I would love, because I think Deflect especially had a really nice team aspect to it, and something for more support type shapers to pick up on, and as opposed to just the Tailwind or Drain or something like that. I like options, especially in the spell book. So we see little bits of values being increased. Actually, Bastion is going to be weaker at early levels, but be better later on. Which
feels right.
Which
That
feels
sounds
right,
right,
yes.
yeah.
Because Bastion currently gets, actually, like, if you take it as your first spell, by the time you get your third spell, Bastion really isn't that useful anymore. It doesn't really, it shields you from, like, one auto attack, it felt like. So I do like that change to it. And Deflect is getting buffed at all ranks and levels, which is something I'm very happy to see. Even though 5-man Deflect stacking was annoying at one point in Dawngate's history, but now Deflect is never seen, so I would still like to see it once in a while. I like to pick it up once in a while, so.
Yeah, this is really in reaction to the Mortal Strike change. Basically, shields were really powerful, especially when stacked, and they had no counterplay. So the only option we had was reduce their values, because that was the only way we could function in a universe where they were really strong. Now that there's actually counterplay you can do against shielding with Mortal Strike affecting shields, it's given us the opportunity to make them strong again, because we can, if they're really strong, or if a team's really going ham on shields, you can just pick up a couple Mortal Strikes and all of a sudden it's not a problem anymore. So that's one of the examples of why we made the Mortal Strike change, was it just gives counterplay, and the existence of that counterplay just gives us the freedom and opportunities to do things like this, to buff these spells which are underused.
And Drain, we've complained a lot about Drain before, but it seems like the only change that's happening is instead of stacking Mortal Strike, it just refreshes the time here. All right, that's so, and obviously that will affect the Deflect and the Bastion.
Yep.
So I just did some quick math, and if you do a 5-man Deflect now, it's like 900 health shield.
Which is huge, right? Like that's huge.
That's
and that
awesome.
That was the problem with Deflect back in the day. But the flip side is, you buy Mortal Strike and it's only 450, and now it's not that. Now for 5 spells, it's not.
Now it's manageable. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's fun. It's just fun to think about.
But it's cool. Like I like that. At level 20, everybody get Deflect. Let's win this team fight at Parasite and close out the game. It especially when it comes to coordinated gameplay, which is something like we're kind of working towards eventually. I think having more options for people, it just makes it's more fun to watch. It's more fun to play and be a part of. I like active decision making as a game goes on, and I think Dawngate works towards that. You guys don't really. It doesn't look like you're enforcing static builds. You're not trying to force any kinds of static build. That's why we're seeing all these kinds of changes. You're trying to make all these items more viable. I mean, we didn't touch on. I just want to touch on it briefly because, like the life drain tree, you guys said, ambition is the only item people get. No one ever gets consumption in the tier 2. Everyone went desire. So we saw some desire changes. We saw some consumption changes. You're trying to make more of these items viable, and it's just encouraging to see.
Yep, that's certainly the goal. Absolutely, is encourage diversity within the player choice landscape.
Real quick, just to touch on one item that this was one of the ones that I was really confused about. So Führer went from 2640, so 2640, to just 3000 with no stat changes. Is the passive that amazing?
It is that amazing.
It sounds like a premium one where you need to actually be around other people to make it functional. It also depends on what your team composition is. So is the premium that amazing that it's worth 360?
Yep, it is extreme. So that's interesting, right? Because we launched that item, and the fact that it required teammates to be around and only certain archetypes really take advantage of it, it had a lot of downsides, right? So we were sort of conservative. We were like, well, we think that this item is going to be kind of weak because it has so many special cases where that need to be met before it can really excel. So I'm pretty sure this was on live. It was at one. It's hard. The internal and external environments blur together in my mind. At one point, it had 20 haste in addition on its aura, in addition to its wind strike passive. And we were like, wow, this item is extremely strong. It's dominating item performance compared to other items. So we removed the haste component of the aura in general, and it only gave the wind strike passive, and that knocked it down a notch. But it was still dominating. That Führer was extremely strong. It's one of those ways, kind of like we talked about last week. Things you can't really feel it as much. It's hard to notice when it occurs, and it is sort of just adding extra damage, often kind of invisibly. But it turns out it was adding a lot.
It's one of those non-visceral items almost. I mean, you can see it, you can watch it happen, but it's conditional and it doesn't really make itself apparent. So
yeah,
interesting.
It's more visceral than like devotion, but not like on the chaos or potency level. It's easier to miss. So yeah, that item was just extremely strong. We just the premium of its passive.
Miane is saying that Führer can proc itself. Is that true, and is that intended?
That is true, and that is intended. It procs a attack, just straight up, because that's what it does.
So here you go, people. There's a little secret for you. You can try, and that is the intended. So get your Führer and let it proc itself.
That's insanity.
I've heard reports. I don't know if it's still true or not, but on Führer's bonus auto attacks, basically almost pseudo rooting the shaper that gets the extra auto attack. Are you aware of that, or is that?
Yeah, I mean that is true. It's not rooting them; it just fires another basic attack, and you can't move while firing a basic attack. So you'll fire a basic, and then you'll immediately fire another basic, and that affects the time to hit on a basic attack. The time until the projectile is released, your character is locked until the projectile is launched, and at that point you can either cancel the auto attack beforehand, or you can then move afterwards. So yeah, I mean, it theoretically does do that simply by nature of firing another basic, but it's not like an actual root. It's simply the basic attack cast time.
Okay.
That's pretty awesome. So do we want to jump back?
We need to talk about Mina. We do need to talk about Mina.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Look at Gasty.
Pretty simple.
All right, let's go ahead and talk. Let's go over the first point. Q, the base damage of this ability has been reduced by, I guess, 5, and then 10, and then 15, and then 20. So she scales really poorly in the late game with the Q comparatively. I'm not saying poorly overall, just comparatively to what it used to be. So it is. Which one was the Q again? I don't play Mina.
Spite. I don't play Mina either.
Ability, Mina, Q.
Yeah, it's
the skill shot projectile.
Oh, right. Okay, it's a skill shot one. Right, and so Basically, oh, it's the Empower one. That's right. So because the Empower was so strong, is that why you guys decided to go ahead and bring down the scaling into late game?
Yeah, we wanted to bring it down for two reasons. She was just doing too much damage overall. She was doing like compared to a mage, she was just doing too much damage.
Yep.
She needed to be brought down a little bit, and we didn't want to bring down her support part of her damage that she
Right.
provides to other people, right? So it was a pretty kind of clear solution. Just bring down the damage that she does in a vacuum, keep the damage that she provides to her host increased.
Awesome.
I just
so
think
then,
it's interesting. They went ahead and lowered Mina's. They overtly lowered her power as opposed to kind of covert. Well, they could have changed her W the way it worked. They could have changed the blitz on her W, but instead they chose to retain the kind of harder to execute aspects of her strength, and instead lowered her power. I would say more directly, as in
I
lowering
feel like
her
it
ratios
keeps her skill
and
cap
her
where
numbers.
it needs to be without destroying that. Yeah.
Right.
Interesting.
That's an interesting choice there.
Yeah. Let's go to the ult. We'll go over E in a second because there's a bunch of that. So Sever Ties, the ultimate. The damage amplification granted by this ability is no longer doubled for Mina or her host. So that seems like a ridiculously large nerf, but I, for one, have welcomed it.
I didn't know it was double damage for her and her
Really?
host.
Oh,
Oh,
my
yeah.
god. it's
I thought it was just
massive.
increased damage for everyone
Dude,
that got hit. I didn't
why do you-
realize there was an
Why do you
interaction.
think she gets chaos so often? Chaos is that 10% increase on magic damage.
Well, yeah,
like,
but I
that's
thought
why
it just
her-
synergized with her ult anyway. You know what I mean? It
That's-
makes them
yeah,
take
but-
more damage.
That's why her and Ferris were absolutely, and maybe still are, absolutely ridiculous because of a 30% increase in damage.
Yep. Yeah, with that ability, it's not egregious in the way certain other abilities in the mobile landscape are. I think that the example that everyone always loves to use is that ability from Dota. I believe it's on Bloodseeker, the one where you move and you take damage.
Yes, burden of knowledge.
Holy shit! Now there is a
the
spider on my wall. I didn't get it.
The spider is real.
Oh! I didn't get it and it fell. Uh-oh.
That's the word. It's gone now.
Oh
Now-
boy.
Gone.
now it's the way-
I don't think it was actually a spider. It was something
It's on
else.
its leg. It's on its
okay.
leg. Gone.
crawl
Don't,
over you, get its revenge.
Yeah, whatever.
it's not gone.
Come at me, bro. Let's do this. I'll burn you. All right. Anyway, continue.
But the with MOBA ability design, right? One of the things that you always have to be aware of is you need to be thinking in mind how much information your opponent needs about this character. Because just like Muzzy said, right? He's like, I don't know what that character does. I've never played that character. Whatever, right? It's like you need to be aware that if something requires too much information from the opponent's point of view, it can be really frustrating and the Bloodseeker example is a good one because it's like, well, I can either move and
Die.
wrong, right? It's a wrong decision, or I can stand still and potentially people and die, and it's just a wrong decision. So regardless of what decision the player makes, they're like, I don't understand what's happening. Why did I die? Right? Rage. Mina's R with the double amplification was sort of getting to that territory. It wasn't nearly that bad. That's obviously the straw man example, but this is why like Varus would jump on you with Mina and just like obliterate you, right? And you're like, oh, that was so strong, right? Why? Or you'd see people try to duel, like 2v2 skirmishes like against her and her host, and that ult would go down. And the correct thing to do, right, is not let the host hit you if it's a carry. If it's an assassin or a carry, just like kite out its duration, right? But that was so invisible, right? It was like 30% or sometimes with power like 40% damage amp. There's no way you're gonna win a duel against that. But
Yeah.
nobody do, right? Because you don't expect something to do that much.
Well, on top of that, Gasty, people don't view a single shaper with Mina inside of her, inside of that
two
person,
shapers.
as two shapers. But you are essentially going up against two shapers worth of power as one package running at you. So a lot of people are like, "Oh my God, I just died to Ferris." No, you died to Ferris and Mina.
And that,
But
that
yeah.
is very challenging from a balance perspective because what you see is like I said last week, right? Like from a balance perspective, what we consider when a character is not balanced until it is balanced statistically and balanced from a perception standpoint. That's when it's generating the most net fun to the game. And
Fun.
Always, perception is greater than intent in literally every aspect of your life. So when you come up against something like this, your perception of how powerful that is going to have to change a kit regardless of statistical balance because the intent doesn't matter. It goes out the window.
Exactly. Mina was basically transferring her power directly onto another character, and she transferred the perception of that power onto that character as well. So, like, you know, Ferris would jump out and 100% you, and you're like, well, Ferris is clearly the problem, right? When
Right.
actually it may have been the incredible damage amplification from Mina.
Yeah. So okay, so we'll move on to the E, the Soul Siphon. The base damage reduction granted by this ability has been reduced to 15%, down from 20.
That's a lot.
So that's an awesome thing right there. She is the percent shaper. I feel like everything is
She's the
ridiculous.
invisible power
She has
shaper.
those stats you can feel. Oh wait,
Yeah.
they're almost subtle.
Yeah. So I don't think that really needs much explanation. Thank you. Is all I have to say.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe.
she was overperforming, and
Right.
this was
See, the downfall to Mina is that when she's alone, she dies, but she's never alone, which means that she's in somebody. And if she's in somebody, the upside, or the downside to Mina, rather, upside for everyone else, is that if you hit that one shaper, you're hitting two at the same time. She's taking 40% of the damage. But then you have 20% damage reduction on top. Like, it just gets like, how do I even calculate if I can kill her or not inside of somebody? So just reducing this down at all is I'm excited about that. The power ratio on the damage reduction granted by this ability has been reduced to 4% per 100, down from 5% per 100. Same kind of thing, unless you want to say something about that one.
Nah, same thing.
Yeah, and then, just fixed a bug, which was it feels almost like I didn't know about this, but I'm really glad. And maybe I did come across this and not even know it, but fixed a bug that was causing the damage reduction portion of this ability to become stuck on a shaper indefinitely. Thank you for catching that one, because holy crap.
That sounds pretty wild.
Permanent 20% damage reduction, just, oh yeah, hey, I don't even need items.
Yeah, it turns out it was pretty strong.
Did you guys find that, or was that submitted by people? Because that's an insane bug
That's
to me.
hard
That
to
feels
find.
game breaking. Yeah.
It's hard to see. Yeah,
I'm not sure where the origin of that fix came from. Dibs is the
Right.
one who fixed that, so you'd have to ask him if it was
like,
found internally or externally.
This is like the god, the ultimate non-visceral bug right there for you.
Yes, absolutely. the fact that has existed since launch and nobody has.
It's gotta be-
I've never seen it.
Now, the question is,
VR, right?
how many times has it stacked multiplied on the same shaper?
Right. So that's
like
that's
they have it indefinitely. Like, you don't even know. So I know, like, we don't really talk about fixing bugs too often, but I'm sorry, that bug seems like it may even be the only reason Mina is strong. So we'll find out about that later on. That's huge. Anyway, guys.
One of the things that actually is the patch note is inconspicuous, but it's a really big deal, is the Moya one.
I was going to mention that, but I hate Moya, so I didn't want people to attack
I hate
me.
her too. I
Moya
feel like
was
that's
gaining,
rejoicing.
basically the instant she dropped below max energy, so she could be at 99% energy.
No.
She was gaining, like, at that point, like 80% of her maximum returns still. It was like, it would interpolate between a really high value and the max value, as opposed from the start to max. So it was like, normally it should be like this, right? You have like this much spectrum. It was basically starting here and going
That's
to here.
actually pretty huge. That bug fix will adjust her clear speed by a significant portion, and a
Right.
lot of her early game power.
I still don't.
And this, like, she needed to be toned down a little bit. She was a little bit strong, so this was a good opportunity to fix this particular
God
bug with
bless
it, because
Okay, here's a very
we have to
Here's
make
a
sure we
very,
do it.
very important question for you. She has been nothing but nerfed since the beginning of time, right? Just nerf after nerf after nerf. And so people get this perception that maybe she's finally at, like, the best spot. She's fine. She's fine. She's been nerfed 4 times. That doesn't necessarily mean that the shaper is balanced. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. It just means that she was ridiculously OP to begin with, and you might have brought her down to just a little OP now. How do you deal with, again, perception, where everybody's like, oh no, like, this is kind of a reverse perception. I still think that she's incredibly powerful and not enough people are playing her. And I don't
Let's
think I've
keep
ever
it that
watched
way,
it.
Muzzy.
I don't think I've won against a Moya. I don't know how to counter her. I don't know what.
All I know is teams with a good Moya can stall a game forever. Like I've had games where we are crushing in both lanes, but their Moya is doing fine and just doing Moya things, and it's just like she can just be such a terror. She forces you to fight specific like specific ways. It's just she's very good. She's just very good.
The biggest issue is still the fact that no matter what, like Blitzcrank, Blitzcrank, he has his hook on a normal ability, but no matter what, she could be 4 levels down. A single ult will change.
Gotta respect the ult.
So how do you deal with that?
It's a side effect of them being some of the original 12 shapers we launched the game with. If you look at the characters who have received very, very consistent, like, small nerfs over the course of, like, 10 times, right? Basically, there's, like, 4 or 5 of them. Nisa receives consistent nerfs every patch a little bit. Desecrator receives consistent changes every patch. Volek gets consistent patches every patch.
I didn't think about Volek.
Moya, consistent changes every patch, right? What you're seeing all the characters that really are like constantly being tweaked is part of the original 12. And the reason for that is because they launched with no frame of reference, right? We had no data when they launched. So they launched in some pretty egregious states. Like Moya was queen of the Dawn Gate for a really, really long time at outrageous numbers. Unbelievable by today's standards of our balance, right? So we're sort of paying debt with them to bring them in line. Whereas characters you see like Kensu, right, comes in, boom, 50% done, perfect. Needs no changes, right? But we're able to do that now because we have the frame of reference from other characters that really helps. Our internal balance process has gotten a lot more refined and better. So, but those original 12, there's some debt from a balance perspective that to get them, narrowed down into exactly where they should be. So that's why you see them kind of continuously getting tweaked. And we're getting really close. Like the tweaks are getting smaller and smaller with every patch. Those characters are getting really close to a good spot. But that's sort of the history of why that happens. And it's frustrating, but we're getting there. They're getting really close. So.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very
Good.
nice.
Good. And yeah, I'm always surprised to see Desecrator get little nerfs because I never considered him OP. I just considered him versatile. But you guys are the devs. You guys
four sources of hard crowd control on one kid. It can get extreme.
Hey, Kel has it too. Well, he has 3, but yeah, I don't know. I just it's amazing to see that he does have AOE though. Lots of AOE. I love his ultimate. He still might have my favorite ultimate in the entire game.
Desecrator.
Desecrator. It's incredibly versatile.
That's a statement I never thought on here.
Really? You can stop spirit well captures with it. You can snipe. You can gain vision. You can zone. You can clear waves as you leave. It's got a relatively low cooldown. It's one of those things that sits underneath a team fight when you don't know what the hell is going on and everyone's life is just draining. You can steal Parasite. It is incredibly versatile.
For a second with it. Oh yeah, get wrecked.
Right, it's so strong. I used to go, why doesn't it stack? Why can't you just stack it? And then once I realized all of these things that you could do with it, I was like, never mind. I take that back entirely. Do not make this thing stack ever, please. So I don't know. It's seriously my favorite thing in the game.
It is cool. The reason why the damage on it is the way it is because of all the CC he has on his kit with his QWD using such strong hard crowd control. His ultimate, there wasn't much room to make his ultimate spectacular, right? It couldn't do tons of burst or do heavy CC or anything, which is why it's more of a utility, like scout, zone, stop spirit wells, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you throw a decay on it, you throw a chaos on it, you can do so much with it.
Yep. He was actually the first balance case that gave us confidence, which I have now revisited my confidence in after Ash. In the concept of having weak ultimates compared to really strong core abilities, in the way that Varus and Ashabel do, because it's a balanced trade-off there that works statistically, but it's a challenge from a perspective, from a perception point of view.
Now, who designed him in his ult?
Dibs. Dibs is the designer of Desecrator.
Dibs, thank you, sir. All right. So do we have anything else we want to talk to Gasty about? We've covered all of the notes here.
The only thing I want to, there was a really good discussion. I mean, you kind of set off a firestorm a little bit last week talking about potentially removing Vanquish from the game, and I was just wondering there was a lot of really good feedback on Reddit this week about it, and I just wanted, and someone brought it up in chat before, and I made a point to remember it. Did you guys peruse that thread? Is there any progress on the Vanquish aspect? Because it seemed to be a really hot button issue for people. And I was just curious if any of the feedback made you guys think something, or have any decisions been made, or are we still kind of in the same place?
So we have improved in that thread, and there's been some great suggestions in there. I can't talk to any specifics about what we're doing internally with it, but what I can say is, first, continue having those discussions. They're extremely useful. Second, a decent amount of the suggestions were worried about Hunter's clear time or ability to not die in the jungle as a sustain metric, and they were some of the things that they were suggesting were designed to help incorporate those elements back into the kit. I can say, don't worry about those elements. Those elements consider them solved by secret means that you guys can't know about
Magic.
yet.
Black magic, right?
But the thing that's really tricky is parasite control. Really, it comes down to and buffs, right? It comes down to objective control. So what we're looking for is more suggestions around ways that we can potentially replace that aspect of Vanquish around its ability to give kind of a normalized level of control around objectives. And don't worry about it as much from a just jungling viability perspective. Assume that is not a concern in a land where Vanquish is removed.
Okay.
But yes, it has been very, very useful. We've been very interested in discussing some of the ideas in those threads internally. So
Cool. I think we can open it up to Q&A now for chat. Yeah, if everyone's cool with that.
Yeah. Anybody has any
Patch note
questions?
Q&A.
So Mianhe, ask your Nisa questions now. Why was Nisa nerfed? Is it specifically to spite Mianhe?
Mina
ahead.
Nisa. Nisa is queen of the Dawn-Gate. She rules over it from her throne at the heart of the world, and she decrees law and says who's going to win games. And she decided that she always wins games. She's interesting, right? Because she's the easiest character to balance because her problem is entirely in numbers, and nobody perceives her as being strong or weak. So it's just like, yeah, whatever, we can just do whatever we want with her. It's great. Her numbers are the best in every single category, or tied with Varian. She is literally every single category, 100% of them. She is either the best or tied with Varian.
What the hell?
Did not know that.
Average CS at any point in time in the game. Average successful ganks that she's contributes to and ends in a kill. Total team fight damage, total shaper damage, total poke damage, total burst damage. She's the best, or tied with Varian in a few of the categories. So it's the thing about her is the reason people don't perceive her to be strong, this is my hypothesis, is because she's not extremely strong in any one category, right? If she was the best in one category by 100%, you would notice it, but she's the best in every category by 5%, so it's distributed over enough of her kit that you don't feel like she's too strong in any one particular aspect. She's just kind of overall too strong. And that's a remnant of her launching as part of the original 12 when we didn't really have a balance benchmark. Now, if there's a balance outlier, it's much more likely to be in one very specific area, and we can solve it much more quickly. Nisa's been an ongoing project because she really is just a little bit too strong across the board.
I think she has a lot of unrealized or perhaps a subtle power in her W. Because it's a unique thing. There's no long duration movement speed steroid in the game except for Nisa, it just dominates the lane, especially on an 80, especially on a range carry who can abuse that mobility more than I would say any other shaper archetype. It's tough. I don't know. I think that's where a lot of her secret power is.
Yeah, no, it's tough. She's been tricky to balance because she doesn't have a clear area where she is too strong, right? It's just kind of generally a little bit strong. So, right, we hit her team fight damage last balance with her. The last balancing tweaks towards her were targeted for her late game team fights. That brought that generally into line, still a little on the strong side. This change obviously aimed at the early game harass slash average CS. Those are the two changes we're looking to change or have impacted by this change. So, it's a constant battle with Nisa to get her where she should be without having people freak out, because she's not perceived as strong because it's amortized across so many different parts of her kit, but she actually is quite strong.
So all the McKellar fanboys now are all rallying all this Nisa talk. They want to know how is McKellar compared to everyone else now that we've got Kenzu, I guess, as far as win rates, and how does McKellar stand up against the others? So where does McKellar stand in the ranks of AD?
So all of the AD carries are very close to each other, except for Nisa. All of the carries are within sub 1% of each other. There's all the carries are here, and then Nisa's like here. It is so all of them are very, very on par. Michaela is doing fine. She is on of the carries, she is probably 0.5% lower than we want her. So you might see very, very small quality of life changes that result in being a buff for her. Hypothetically, right, maybe we would make her W an auto attack reset or something like that. Just makes her feel a little bit more responsive, has a positive balance impact, but nothing significant. In fact, with all of the carries, you probably won't see any significant tuning changes because the vast majority of them are right where we want them, with the exception of Nisa.
Pinnacle of Necrosis, asking questions just so everybody knows. He asked, any invoker or insane high skill cap shapers that require micro of units in the works? Twerp, ask him. Well, okay, just so everybody knows, first of all, I'm going to half answer this for Gasty. Nothing is off the table. And two, no one is going to tell anybody anywhere what is in the works right now. So your question is almost completely nullified. If you've ever seen any of the Waystone streams, they always ask this kind of question, and the answer is always nothing is off the table. Gassy, is there anything else to add to that?
I can just give my canned response on Invoker that I have practiced to a T at this point.
You've been asked about this before? About Invoker specifically?
Maybe once or a billion times.
And I think the way that I would describe Invoker is a very poor interface for accessing multiple abilities. I think that the concept of multiple abilities is really cool. I think the theme of Invoker is very cool, of merging these different kind of elemental aspects. I think the interface for actually mechanically triggering those abilities is a little cumbersome. That is where the negative complexity of Invoker comes from. Just understanding how to use his abilities is challenging, and that's not a good skill cap, right? The Wikipedia aspect of a character should not be where its skill comes from. Its skill should come from the mechanics of playing it, right? In the way that Ashbel is very high mechanical. It should come in the strategy from playing it, right? The strategic decision making, build diversity, etc. It shouldn't come from obscure wiki knowledge. So I think that it's absolutely likely that we would make a character in the spirit of Invoker, right? A lots of different abilities, accessing lots of different abilities, cool merging of elements theme, whatever it may be. That's all very cool. We would probably just want to do it in a more intuitive way. I feel like this is the polymorph concept from League of Legends, which is, or sorry, that's probably, it's confusing. It's the internal terminology for
Warcraft 3.
The shapeshift characters like Nidalee or Jace or Elise that use their ultimate as a single button press for accessing new abilities. That's a similar concept to Invoker from a design perspective, a mechanical design perspective. It's just in my opinion, that's one example of a way to do multiple accessing multiple abilities. That's a little bit more intuitive than the way that Invoker does it. They're both fine. Invoker allows you to access more abilities, which is cool. But we would probably want to do something that allows you to access multiple abilities in a little bit less of an encumbersome way than Invoker does it.
Alucard's been asking about glory buffs. I don't know if it's necessarily buffs. I mean, the percentage health
it's
scaling went up, but the price also went up. So
I think
now,
it- yeah.
is that Gasty, like, is that a price normalization just for normalization's sake, and then you buffed it to compensate, or was it let's buff this item and normalize its price?
No, that item was just a result of the price increase.
Okay.
Basically, the premium we'd associated with its passive was relatively accurate from all of our telemetry. We had to increase the price of the item. We didn't want to increase its stats, so we had to increase the effectiveness of its passive in order to compensate the premium for the new price point.
Sounds good to me.
Also, I think it's really interesting that resilience was affecting Tensu's magic damage, and
Yep, that was actually a big
so-
deal.
so like that should be a significant secret power buff to Kensu, which is interesting because he was already competing just fine. So
It was also affecting Duelist, so that Spirit
Oh.
Stone will be much more effective.
Oh,
Oh, that's-
good.
Duelist was worthless. It was getting nullified by will and then also by resilience. Like my
Yeah.
word,
It was having a sad time. It was good in the jungle though.
it was. It is.
Now it's good everywhere.
Interesting. Okay.
Someone
Yeah,
was
it is
asking
good.
before about the spell book. Any ETA on when we're going to get some more spells, or we're going to continue tuning the ones we have before we get any new ones?
I don't have an ETA. We are testing a decent amount of new spells internally. We have to be very, very confident in a spell in order to release it to live, because the spell book is something that cannot be infinitely expanded. There's UI and usability restrictions there. You wouldn't want the spell book to have 100 spells, obviously, right? Strongman
No.
example,
Right.
but that's too many spells. I think that there is room for more spells than there are currently, but we need to be very, very careful when we introduce a new spell. So we're pretty hardcore in our internal testing of them before they could go live. There's a bunch that we're testing internally. These have already been leaked, right? So it's through dibs like 100 times on stream. Haha. Hashtag. Right. There's warp, which allows you to teleport to various things. There was a heal spell that would heal an ally. Not you, but you could use it to like heal an ally. There's one that we're testing, which is called Repel, which allows, basically it's sort of like Force Staff, but less weird. So there's a variety of things that we're looking at. It's tricky though. It needs to create really positive gameplay. It needs to be you need to have an incentive to use it against all the other spell books. So it needs to be
Right.
it needs to be competitive against Blink and Dispel and Blitz and Drain and all of those in a way that makes that it has to be really, really powerful in order to compete, because those spells are all extremely powerful, and it needs to be a niche that hasn't been covered yet, right? So like none of these spells do hard CC, but in order to do hard CC at that power level, is that good for the game? That's like a 3-second hard stun or something, right? Probably not. That's why it's really hard to introduce new spells, but we are working on it.
How do you feel about ranged ADC like progression in game? Obviously, range carries are going to be strongest at the end of games. You know, if they get 6 items, obviously. So, but what about just the progression of that? You know, is it just kind of are you playing like where does the end goal lie? Do you want all ADCs to kind of become like Vex, where it's just a waiting game, and can I get to 35 minutes where I can have enough farm to get these many items, or do you want certain like ADCs to be strong at certain points of the game and have strength and weaknesses in that way, or do you want ADCs kind of to be normalized, if that makes any sense?
It does make sense. I think that it's a complicated answer. I think we go somewhere in between. I think all ADCs, regardless of what type of ADC they are, should follow that rock paper scissor mentality to a degree. And certain characters will either do it better or weaker, or add additional elements onto their kit. So Vex, for example, combines the 80 carry damage of a single target into an AoE spectrum. He basically is able to provide team melting level damage, but in an AoE. Whereas if you look at somebody like Nisa, right? Obviously her basic attacks are just single target. She will never be able to just basic.
Oh no.
I think Gasty,
Did we lose Gasty?
Gasty died here.
Oh no. Gasty, please. Hopefully this is just a small
Just
hiccup.
a small hiccup.
No, Skype. Skype, you were
Lost
doing so
Gasty.
good for so long. Why now? Unfortunate. Real quick while we see if Gasty's coming back. Battle in the bot lane is returning this Friday.
That's right.
So myself and Spinal Dash will be casting Battle in the bot lane. It's a 2v2 tournament. It's going to be over on the Waystone Games channel at 8:30 Eastern. What's that? 5:30 Pacific. So you can get your buddies together. It's 2v2. The win conditions are first team to 2 kills, first team to destroy the enemy team's binding. And Gasty might be back.
I should be back.
We got audio.
Comcast is like, you know what time it is? It's time to turn off your internet.
Yeah.
But you know, they're keeping us on our toes. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Where did I cut out?
You were talking about Nissa.
Nissa,
Cut
yeah.
out Nissa in contrast.
Is it Nissa or
All right,
Nissa?
so-
I don't know.
And
Nissa
toggle
in
your camera
contrast.
if you can, Gasty. I
Boom. Boom. Hello?
There
Hello,
you
my
go.
friends.
It's
Beautiful.
loading. It's
There we go.
loading. There it is.
I see your beautiful face. Welcome back.
Excellent. So, yeah, so AD carries, all of them should be able to fulfill the goal of an AD carry. In team select, when draft mode comes in and you're like, all right, guys, we need an AD carry, any of the ones who are considered an AD carry should be at a high level, be able to fulfill that ask, right? As when a team says, I want an AD carry, you should be able to pick any of them and fulfill that. In fact, that's actually a good metric that we use internally. If we say, when we ask ourselves the question of, if somebody in Shaper Select says, we want a mage, would this mage be a viable solution there, right? This is actually what got Freya moved out of the carry category into the assassin category. If you were like, I want a carry, right, thinking Michaela or Varian, and somebody picks Freya, you're probably like, WTF, that's not what I want, Alt F4, right? And that is... So at a high level, carries all need to be similar enough within their archetype to fulfill that high level ask. But then within that, they should be distinct enough that you can then specialize within that ask for something specific. Like, okay, we're going for an early game team, or a poke team, or a late game team, or a protect the X team, or whatever that may be. And that's where we want diversity. Within that, you know, so every character we add to the roster should add that extra bit of diversity, right? A way for it to integrate into a team composition that hasn't existed before within that archetype.
So earlier somebody asked about Outrider, not Outrider, sorry, Adventurer. That seems like it's with the limited amount of bushes on the map. How come it's so useless? Like, how come you can get just as much, if not more, actually more movement speed from Outrider, even though the condition is you just have to be outside of combat, which is technically the same thing as being in a bush most of the time.
It's interesting, right? That perk is one that appears weak on the surface. It's actually pretty strong in terms of its performance.
Can be,
but
yeah.
It is a...
What are your sources?
It's one of those perks which the times it triggers is really, really narrow, so it feels weak because
Right.
it's an experiment with perk design, right? We have some perks like just all stats, which are on 100% of the time, and then we have some perks, you know, which trigger conditionally, but mostly on Ravager, right? Things like that. Then you get into ones which are slight, you know, Ravager and Duelist. Then you get into ones which are a little bit more conditional, like Rogue or Reaper, but can still trigger decently when you want them. I think Outrider and Adventurer are on the other end of the spectrum, where it's like they're not triggering that often, at least when you want them to. And
Outrider is amazing. It triggers the second you step out of the base.
oh,
So
sorry, not Outrider, Adventurer.
Adventure. Okay.
Sorry. And I think it's an interesting content choice for players and from a design perspective to be able to have things that are a little bit more impactful they spike higher, but they spike less often over the course of a game. But it does create a perception of uselessness because you're like, well, I'm never experiencing this. I think that there's an opportunity for us to introduce more perks of that type into the game to try to provide a larger array of choices for various niches. And Outrider, or not Outrider, sorry, Adventurer may need some love, but it's actually right now.
To be fair, it is
bad.
small and space efficient for the stats that it gives. It seems as long as far as like
Pretty.
fitting in the it fits beautifully, and I think it can work really well with Rogue. But yeah, it seems to lackluster in comparison. But maybe because of the shape, you guys can consider it to be actually fairly powerful, I guess.
Yeah, I mean it allows for you to run other passives and get a decent amount of stats with it because it is a relatively compact shape. Generally, you'll see that the really niche in terms of their activation criteria shapes are going to have more compact, are going to be more space efficient, so that you can try to either fit a more generalized passive in with it or more generalized stats. So when you are actually using it, you're actually gaining more efficiency from that loadout than any other type of loadout, right? If you're triggering that component in addition to all the other stats you get because it's so space efficient, that's like top tier. It's just hard to take advantage of all that. And right now it's move speed with brush, but I think that there is an opportunity for others of its kind that are potentially a little bit not easier to activate. They probably activate around the same total number of times per game, but just different in their activation criteria which may be more controllable by the player, and as a result more useful in fights.
So that's good to know that not only are we getting new spells potentially, but we're also going to be getting new passive stones. Are we potentially getting any non-passive stones? Because the last one that you guys released was the Mastery Power L stone, which was a really cool addition. So are we going to see more normal stones as well?
Yes, you absolutely will. The reason why there hasn't been a lot of stones released yet is because we are still finalizing our pipeline for how to release those. Shapers obviously have taken priority, so they got kind of the first rev of our pipeline. Now that we have a pretty good idea of our Shaper pipeline, we're starting to expand it to the Spirit Stone pipeline. So our hope is that we can be releasing those at a very regular cadence, not as often as Shapers, but several new ones, every couple months maybe. Because they require the effects, they require icons, they require a variety of art for the loadout page, right? They require a fair amount of content to be created, just like a Shaper does. Obviously, it's different types of content and not the same magnitude, but that's why there hasn't been new ones yet. But we absolutely are testing new ones internally and want to release those regularly going forward.
I saw a really cool question before.
Yeah, I was going to say, were there any others?
The Historic asked something. I can't find the question. Here it is. Have you considered the possibility of environmental effects on alts visually, like something that affects the whole map and the way it looks, like Night Stalker, for example, making it rain around the map for a few seconds or something? I think that's really cool. I always liked environmental type stuff, like creating fissures in the ground or things like that. And we really, off the top of my head, I can't think of anyone who has anything like that.
Kenzu, right?
Well,
Gasty
besides
Shaper,
Kenzu
baby.
cutting and making his own path or whatever. There's been some cool videos popping up on the Reddit with some fun Kenzu alt spots. But where do you guys stand as far as like terrain morphing obviously you're okay with it, but is that something you're looking to do more in the future, or have things like maybe just a visual thing that actually doesn't affect gameplay, but like rain or something?
Yes, I'm a big fan of it.
Do you have opposers?
I can't talk about any specifics, but there are some shapers internally. In fact, Dibs today had a conversation with me. He came over and he was like, "I just did this thing. It's sort of wacky," and I loved it. It was awesome. And it involved environmental augmentation in the way you're describing. If that shaper is in the game, the environment has aspects to it just naturally that would not be in existence if that character was not in the game. And I think it's super cool. It needs to be done carefully, obviously. It has performance implications, has clarity implications, right? If a new player plays the game with that character in it, they're like, is it a WTF factor? All those are solvable problems, and I think it's very cool. So I would not be surprised if you saw some things like that in the future.
Cool.
Cool.
Any other question, guys? Last round of cues, and then we're gonna wrap things up.
Mianhe wants to know why hasn't duress been touched?
Duress is strong, but not super overly so that it required immediate attention. All of these balance changes have impact on all the things that aren't changed, right? If there are two characters in the game, and one of them is at a 75% win rate and one of them is at 25%, you don't need to nerf one and buff the other, right? By nerfing one, you would inherently buff the other. So that is why we do balance changes both to items and shapers in a batch, is because while there are items, that obviously are not included in these balance changes, which are trending either strong or weak, but the changes that we are making with this patch will impact those as well. So the balance of the game can be impacted without something directly being changed, right? Like duress or other items can go up or down in their performance without being changed by nature of other things in the games being changed. So it's not a strong enough problem in the vacuum to be addressed. And the changes we're making to some of the other choices in that tree to make them a little bit more viable and competitive should have a positive impact on it towards its balance state.
So this seems like another case of perception versus intent, or perception versus, I guess, telemetry. So is this? I mean, because I've heard almost everyone who says no, don't nerf duress, it's because they use duress and they love it and it's amazing for them. So I've never heard anything like you don't need duress. It's like it's not always necessary, or yes, we should get this now. It's always like just get duress.
Right.
So again, with that kind of perception versus the telemetry, still nothing, still like not something yet because of lack of impact at this point.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like it is considered valuable because it is considered to be very good, and it is considered to be very good because its effect, while being good, is also extremely noticeable. Hard CC is the most visceral thing in the entire game. If you want to make somebody notice somebody,